Welcome to the Criminologist Podcast. Our goal here is to educate and enlighten our listeners, focusing on the latest and greatest evidence-based interventions to help individuals desist from a life of crime and delinquency. And not only those factors which drive folks into crime, we also look at the reasons why people exit a life of crime. Also, we attempt to paint an accurate picture of that journey from the perspective of the justice-involved individual. Too often, our perceptions of those involved in the system are tainted by media-driven caricatures created to sell newspapers or movie tickets. This adds little to a healthy dialogue as to how to best address criminality. This podcast will avoid stereotypes and biases. We will endeavor to accomplish the first two goals in a way that keep you, the listener, interested and even entertained. And now, the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidsson.
Hello, and welcome to episode 62 of The Criminologist Podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. Folks, if you've heard me say it once, you've heard me say it 100 times. Just as there are a multitude of pathways into a criminal trajectory, there are a multitude of pathways out of that trajectory. Now, thanks to the work of James Bonta and Don Andrews and others, we have a pretty good understanding of the pathways in. Those pathways out of criminality, however, are perhaps less understood. Or, more to the point, we are beginning to understand, thanks to the desistance literature, that merely extinguishing those criminogenic variables which one could consider the stepping stones of the pathways into crime, merely extinguishing those have a decent but limited effect size, which is why I love speaking to folks who have walked those pathways out of crime to hear what their experience was like. Remember, if you've not had a chance to watch it yet, I speak of these pathways in and out of crime in an installment on my YouTube channel, The Criminologist. Within the Desistance from Crime playlist, which I've created on that channel, look for the video entitled Desistance from Crime, Pathways In, Pathways Out. I have also left a link of that episode in the show notes of this podcast. And so, in an effort to learn more from those with lived experience, I am delighted to share with you my recent conversation with Eddie Flanagan, joining us all the way from the United Kingdom. Eddie spent much of his life in England's criminal justice system, and after 20 years of imprisonment and 35 years of addiction, is now a freelance artist behind Ed the Head Flanagan, a YouTube channel, and so much more. So with no further ado, I bring you my conversation with Eddie Flanagan, and I will see you all on the other side. Why don't we start off, Eddie, by you telling us a little bit about yourself and, generally speaking, a little bit about your journey.
My name's Eddie Flanagan. I was born in Ireland in 1958. My parents moved to London in 61. I'm one of 8 children, 6 boys, 2 girls. My father was an alcoholic. The memories I do have of him are not pleasant ones. And that's not really associated with his drinking, but other stuff, because I forgave him his drinking as a child. I've got the man himself, but I didn't have a positive role model around. I'm about the middle in age, in the age group of the 8 children. So my older brothers dealt with my father when he was capable of being violent and getting away with it. And as soon as they were old enough to deal with it, he was gone. But I didn't understand that as a child. That's just looking back as an adult. So I didn't really have a father figure. And then I think I then had a surrogate father, a friend, a so-called friend of the family. And he became my surrogate father, and he was the opposite to my dad. He was attentive. Because with 8 kids, there's not a lot of money around. And he owned, in England, we had corner shops. So everybody in the area, this is in the 60s and the 70s, before supermarkets were the thing. So they were sort of an established member of your community. So I went to work there, and he started to abuse me, and I didn't tell people for various reasons. So, I didn't really trust adults. And at the same time, I started secondary school. My dyslexia wasn't diagnosed, so I was always being, not told off, but put to the back of the class, or being told I wasn't trying or concentrating. I knew that wasn't the case. I didn't know what the case was, but I knew I was as intelligent, if not more intelligent, than most of the people around me because of my retention, the way I could read subplots in conversations, and various other things. So I think that combination of a child going through those traumas, I just decided to stop going to school and hang about on the streets with the other kids who didn't want to go to school for whatever reason. So my role models were the older thieves. So, and because when I was about 13, I started working for this guy when I was 11. And I used to run bets to the local bet maker. That was my job. I was a runner. So all the older criminals in my area knew me from a young boy, knew my dad was absent. I'll leave it at that. And so they looked after me, and they was always giving me tips, buying me Coke, you know what I mean? And I didn't realise it, but these are all the sort of local villains, the people that hung about in betting shops in the early 70s and stuff like that. So to me, my role models were these guys. I looked up at these guys. I saw what they did as glamorous. And I thought, yeah, that's what I want to be part of. It's like a big family because you see it with the child's eyes. And so that's what I did. I started hanging about in the streets. Very soon got into trouble. Aged 16 was my first arrest, really. At 16, I got 3 months, what we call a detention centre, which is basically a military school. Very, very brutal. I got released from there, but arrested at the gate for an offence that I was waiting for, and they sent me to a borstal, which in England can last from 6 months to 2 years. We no longer have them. I was serving that borstal when another court case come up, and I was given 4 years YP, which means you're a young prisoner. So I was only 19. You have to be 21 to be an adult. But I was such a handful, they had a thing then called Start Up, and they made me an adult at 19. And I ended up in the worst prison. I was very disruptive, very subversive. And I was an angry young man, and the system was perfect for me to fight against. So, yeah.
When you were speaking and you referenced that you were working for the local villains, as you put it, and looking up to them. It reminded me, I don't know if you've ever seen the great Martin Scorsese movie Goodfellas, but with Henry Hill.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Same thing.
But I didn't have a glamorous life, though.
Yeah.
All these stories I hear with people with similar backgrounds to mine, and very glamorous lives. I didn't have the glamour. I don't think there was fun along the way. I'm not saying there wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
I was very hedonistic. But yeah, similar to that. That was it. You get taken under somebody's wing. So then by the time I was 16, the proper men villains had known me for a few years. They knew I followed their code. And I was accepted at a young age, and I started mixing with much heavier criminals. And with that, the offending, it started. I love motorbikes. I still motorbike, sell the engines, and I like fast cars. But I could drive, but I liked stealing them. I liked the thrill of speed, adrenaline, drinking, taking drugs. Anything that stopped me feeling like that kid who needed some adult, sort of like, role models. It didn't happen. So I think I stuck with that mindset up until roughly about the age of 30 when I started to educate myself. But I think really from the age of 12 to 30, I was just emotional time bomb going off left, right, and centre.
So we know, just as there are multiple pathways into criminality, criminality and addiction. There are also multiple pathways out. Share with us your journey of desistance and sobriety, if you would, Eddie.
Sure. I'm sober coming up to 11 years. I've got my previous convictions here. I won't bore you with them, but this is full, both sides full up. They started in 1975, resulting in a total of 20 years of prison, 3 years here, 4 years here. But I was always in trouble in prison. I was always violence and riots and escaping. So, and that anger really only dissipated at around about the age of 30 when the teacher recognised my dyslexia, said, do you know you're dyslexic? And I said, no, because I'd always steered clear of education because it made me feel bad about myself because I was always being judged. And all of a sudden that fear was taken away and learned coping mechanisms. And through educating myself, I then did social sciences, learned about my conditioning, why things happen. I really got into psychology and stuff. I'm a great fan of Jung, you know what I mean, because stuff is set up in our childhood. And not everybody with the same childhood experiences will turn out the same way. But the 6 boys in my family, 4 boys were alcoholics. And I'm sure that is something to do with the booze and us coping with childhood trauma. I came from a working class background where it was a manly thing to drink. When I decided to become a thief, and I did decide that, I thought, right, I'm not, because I saw this, where I grew up, Edgware Road, the bit I grew up in is a poor area. It's posh now, but when I grew up, it was poor. But it was surrounded by the richest areas in London, on every side. And my mum used to clean these famous people's houses, and I had this anger that this woman with 8 kids had to do 3 jobs, and and I thought, right, I want to take rich people's stuff. I don't want to help the rich people, but I'm going to take your stuff. And that, and I know it sounds crazy, but anger is an energy, and I didn't have an outlet. Mm-hmm. The only outlet I had was anger. And,
You mentioned when you turned 30, we have a expression over here, probation and parole officers, because we will reflect on sometimes, despite our best efforts with evidence-based practices, for some individuals, that aging out process really works. So we have an expression over here where we say a probation officer's best friend is a client's 30th birthday, because folks just sort of, again, hit that wall, if you will.
Yeah.
Hey, talk a
49
bit.
49 was the age for me when I stopped doing what I was doing. So, but I started to educate from the age of 30. It took me that long to process it.
Hey, talk a bit about how you first discovered art as a creative and arguably rehabilitative outlet, and what's that experience been like for you, if you would, please?
It saved my life. In prison, I had a talent. I could do portraits from anything. The matter was I could portrait it, and people could pay me to do that. So that gave me an independence within the prison system, because they give you jobs, pay you very small amounts, and if you're naughty, they take away that small amount and other privileges. I didn't need that. I could earn in a day what they would pay me in a month. Or, no, that's an exaggeration. I could earn a normal inmate's earnings for a week in half a day. I could do 10, 20 pictures a week. And so I could really walk my own path, because in prison, you really need to belong to a clique for safety. For part of the 20 years I served inside, I did 10 years with one of my brothers, my brother Tom, who's passed away. So we were our own clique. If I didn't have him, it would be somebody who I would have known for many years, and you'd watch each other's back, because there's just safety in belonging to a clique. And but I could avoid all that because everybody wanted pictures done. I could earn my own income. I could stick my fingers up to authority, because the only thing they could take away from me was canteen, and I could get my own canteen if I wanted. And I liked the creative process. It allowed me to escape. I devoured books. My dyslexia doesn't affect my reading. My reading's fine. So I just devoured books. Because of my art and I could earn an income, they do remedial education within the British prison system. And I'm going back like 30, 40 years. Now you can do courses. Then you couldn't. So what I'd do is, like, for instance, there was a guy who was doing 15 years for kidnapping. And he was a headmaster before he did that. He's kidnapped someone, got 15 years. So I used to pay him to teach me. I'd do him favours, he'd teach me. We got old syllabuses on psychology, old over university stuff. He'd set me exercises, and I'd help him out because I could earn an income. I'd pay him in goodies. The main goodies then to barter was either confectionery or tobacco and drugs, obviously. So, yeah.
I've seen some of your artwork, Eddie. It's amazing. You've got some of it up on YouTube now.
Thank you.
I've subscribed to your channel recently. Talk about that process.
This is all new to me. I've only been doing this stuff for 2 years.
Well, you could have fooled me. It's amazing. You really must enjoy your work. Yeah. Talk a little bit about that process of those videos together, posting on YouTube, and what that inspiration and what's that all about. That's awesome.
I'll tell you how it makes sense to me. The only time I ever did art was when I was in prison. Because when I wasn't in prison, I was drunk, stoned, stealing, or being hedonistic, or doing whatever I did. Because I lived within the subculture that is crime in any society. It is a separate subculture with its own rules, its own regulation, its own codes. The only time I came into contact with normal society was with authority because of my offending. My offences were of the right offences. I didn't have any of a sexual nature. I didn't have any for arson. I had stuff for armed robberies, fighting, blah, blah, blah. All the stuff that's acceptable within the criminal fraternity. So I had a place in the pecking order within the prison system. I had my art to earn me an income, which meant that I could be self-sufficient. I prefer to, and in any society, creative people will congregate. I taught myself to play guitar, started to write songs. My art, so I hung about with a musician. I learned from them. But we were a very small clique because, but there is, I've seen some amazing artists in prison. So and when I went in prison, I never drew because I was too busy doing naughty stuff. And that went on until the age of 49. The only time I created was when I was in prison. That's 20 years worth, so that's a lot of creating. I read every book I wanted to read. I educated myself to a standard where I understood life. So I had all the tools, but my addiction kept me tied in. My offending kept me tied in. I did about 15 rehabs. I thought I was incurable, to be quite honest. And then 15 years ago, I've got a daughter. She's 27. When she was 12, she saw me drunk. She'd never saw me drunk, and she saw me drunk because I was in prison for most of her life. And that look on her face, that was a watershed. That was 15 years ago. She's 27. So I haven't offended in 15 years. It took me 4 years to get sober. But I've been trying to get sober for 25 years. I've done roughly 15 rehabs. I've been in and out of psychiatry. Psychosis was a semi-regular thing because I would take so much alcohol, so much drugs, not eat, all the tension and the stress and the anxiety that was going on in my head that I weren't dealing with. I was just a loose cannon. So I got chucked out of every rock band I was in because I was madder than the rockers and stuff. Or I wouldn't turn up, or all of a sudden I was in prison for a few years. So I never ever felt I fitted in anywhere apart from my art, because I can do that myself. I got sober 11 years ago, and shortly after getting sober, I had health issues. I had no teeth. By the time I stopped, I had no teeth. I was physical wreck on my teeth. I had to take that from 90% of them stuff. I self-medicated for years. And so 11 years ago, I took some tests, realised I had onset of arthritis and a bone condition called drifting. I also had a serious sports injury in 1984, which really affected me and my mobility. So for the first 5 years of my sobriety, it was just getting to a place where I could physically be able to take on more, because I was a wreck. I'd only ever done stuff drunk or stoned or with props or by trying to be somebody else. I imitated everybody else, a comedian. And if you took all the props away, that I didn't know who I was. But thankfully, because of reading books, I'd heard about Gethin Jones, a guy called Graham Seed, who was a real influence on me. A guy who was into violence. Not that I was a violent man. I committed acts of violence for the world. I'm not a violent man. It's a commodity. It's currency. But in the criminal world, it trumps money, violence. And if you have something, somebody will try to take it off you if they think they can put it. So you're forever living in that environment, within your head and within the environment you actually live in. So everything is sort of like Mars. So, but it slowed me down. But unfortunately, it meant it crippled my hands. My hands became crippled, so I could no longer draw. I was going blind. I'd gone blind in my left eye because of cataract. I was half blind in my right eye. So then I had to have surgery. Blah, 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 blah. I can see again now. All the health issues are sorted out. And that took about 5 years, really, that process, because I was two years sober, so 9 years ago, when my brother Tom died. He was the first brother to die. I've buried 4 brothers in 6 years. And I didn't drink again, but I went on heroin. I was married. I've been married twice. My first wife, Marion, passed away. I was married for a second time. And I went back on the heroin, and because my family weren't around me, just my wife, it wrecked my marriage. But I didn't drink, Sam, I didn't drink. But important lesson. So, and then 2 years later, another brother died. And gradually, through dealing with these traumas, with the support I had around me, from these people that I was now mixing with and working with, because I did street outreach before my limbs started to become crippled. For the last 10 years, I've been working with local churches, day centres, feeding the homeless. I worked in Manchester in the drop-in centre for addicts, getting people into rehabs, dealing with people who couldn't even get into day centres. I did my own street outreach and stuff. But then the health issues meant I couldn't do that any longer. I couldn't draw because my hands were knackered. But I thought digital art. I thought, because the technology, I thought, by doing this, touching that screen, I can create something. Don't need to put any pressure on it. So 2.5 years ago, I thought, right, that's what I need to do, because I believe that I've overcome stuff. I used to play 6-string rhythm guitar. When my hands got to this point, I couldn't do that anymore. I played a 4-string bass guitar, and I can still play that. Not as well as I'd like to, but I just changed the medium. So I swapped my pens for digital art. And that's what we have to do in life. And if we lose somebody, and in order to deal with that grief, we make mistakes, then that's a life lesson. Nobody's immune to it. And just because I stopped offending didn't mean that I'd learned to deal with things in a different way. I had to relearn that. And that's taken sort of like 11 years. I've enjoyed the last 5 years. Up to that point, it was hell. I must be honest. I never ever felt like drinking. But my marriage collapsed. Everything was going wrong. And it's all because I hadn't found what I needed to find to make me be fulfilled. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot done that. It gave me, because I have to create, whether other people see it or not. It's just part of who I am. And I love the process. And by that process, I engage with people. Mm-hmm. I'm not a filmmaker yet, but that is my goal. I do short 2-minute animation, the conversation piece. Hopefully people will see my potential, see what I'm trying to do. Because up to this point in time, this phone that I'm speaking to you on has a 3-inch screen. Well, everything I've done to this point has been created on 3 inches. With a man with crippled hands who's had 2 cataracts removed from his eyes. It's the process. It's not about the quality. It's about the message. It's about the feeling. It's about the authenticity of what I do. Now I will upgrade my equipment and I will become more professional. But that's my therapy. Because my thing is I didn't tell anyone about my abuse. It was a different world then. So I've made videos to encourage children to speak up if they're being abused. I haven't got to go public with that yet because it's all about timing. I also talk about overcoming my addiction to alcohol and then relapsing on the heroin and how I deal with the grief without then going back to the heroin and the thing. And I do that by expressing myself through my art. And I believe art is a wonderful medium because sometimes we can't express in words how we feel, but we can draw it. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad drawing. And even if it's a crap drawing, you've expressed that. So next time, text me a parrot if I can, like counselling. I didn't tell anybody about my abuse until I was 60. I told my family, but only because I knew that I wanted to go public and make videos to encourage kids to talk out about sexual abuse. So up to that point, there was no point in telling my family. It would only hurt. So I told my family about, when I was 60. The healing I've had in the last 3 years through being able to actually say, this is what happens. I don't go into details. It's not about that. It's about trauma, childhood trauma. And that if it's not dealt with while the trauma is being perpetrated, there's a likelihood you could, like I did, turn to addiction. Other people turn to other stuff. But the only way I could deal with it was through addiction because I didn't know who I was. I thought the person I was vulnerable and everybody would take advantage of. So I had to become a person who that couldn't happen to.
Your digital artwork is amazing, Eddie.
Thank you.
I will do this
It's
too.
very humbling. Thank you.
I'll do this on my, on my YouTube channel, The Criminologist. I've got various playlists set up of other individuals. So I will create a playlist for Ed the Head, which I believe is the name of your YouTube channel, correct?
Yeah. It's a family nickname I was given because of the copious amounts of stuff I used to take, and I used to call them heads. So it was said as a joke, and it stuck. And then when I got sober, the 4 boys in my family who were alcoholics, 3 have passed. They're all sober. My brother Johnny was 31 years sober. My brother Ian died 2 weeks ago. He was 7 years sober.
Well, I'm so sorry to hear about that. Say, in your experience,
he changed his legacy. He died a sober man, and people saw the real man.
Well, that is great to hear.
Yeah. That's what I'm doing. Changing my legacy for my daughter, for my family.
I love that reframe, changing your legacy.
Yeah.
Speaking of changing people's legacies, in your experiences, Eddie, just broadly speaking, what works in rehabilitation and prisoner reintegration, and conversely, what does not work?
Role models, and what doesn't work is pampering and political correctness. They're the 2 biggest dangers. If you go to any health, I'm a recovering alcoholic. If I went to my doctor and say, I really need to, I want to stop, they said, everyone, they've got to by law, so they say, well, don't just stop drinking because you could die. So your doctor is telling you it's all right to keep drinking. Cut it down if you can before you go into rehab. It's called addiction, not a hobby. You're not going to take on suggestions. More people die at home because they're detoxing in a squat, because that's what their lives come to. So I ended up in squats and bedsits that squalid. There was more chance of me dying in one of those hellholes than there was me in a rehab where somebody would see I'm fitting and calling out. So for me, I've been to two types of rehabs. Rehabs where when you're really bad, but don't get me wrong, it is traumatic. So when you detox. So I've been to rehabs where they detoxed me with Valium. In the beginning, it was Epinephrine. Then they changed it to Valium. Then they changed it to something else. But that was you would only get that if you had full funding, which our government used to give to these places to rehabs. But not a lot you can't get it now. It's ridiculous. So when people couldn't get funding anymore to go to these posh places where they would give you Valium detoxes and nurses checking out, the slack was picked up by religious organisations. Look, I'll talk about Christian ones because that's the society I've grown up in. So a lot of Christian rehabs sprang up. And they were no nonsense. We don't do drug detoxes. We're all 90% of the people staff there are ex-addicts, recovering addicts who now work for the organisation. And they know as well as I do there's more chance of that person dying at home because the doctor said don't stop. You know what I mean? Wait till you get a bit. Yeah. But I know why they say it, because if that person dies, I'm 63. I've known probably dozens and dozens who have died in squalid little places. I've only known two people die in detox, and that's because they fit so bad, and it wasn't to do with the detox; it was to do with their health issues. So political correctness, that's really stifling a lot of things, because a lot of the stuff I see around. Because as I say, I speak out about child abuse, and I want children to speak out about it. And at some point, I will formulate something so I can do that in the child-friendly way. But that's with experience. I see more political correctness around the offenders who have done the paedophiles than the victims. People are frightened to call us to tell it how it is. And I say this, and I'm not judging anybody. Who am I to judge? People have forgiven me for stuff that I don't deserve forgiveness for, probably in other people's eyes. But the fact is, I've heard the excuse, yeah, but they were abused as a child. That's why they did. Bollocks. It's a load of rubbish. If you've experienced that fear and that pain, that would make you even more determined not to inflict that on somebody else. But I hear that more than I hear talk about the victims, the kids, because everyone talks about institutionalised racism, which is true. It's in every society. Your country's dealing with it now. We're a bit behind you, but we're catching up. There's also, I think it's something to do with the public school system. A lot of the people who run our governments, our organisations, a lot of them come from public school. And how to put this politely? Homosexual practices are not unknown within them because they're all boys' school. Their fathers went to them as father being a man, blah, 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 blah. But then they go on, these elite, to become practicing paedophiles, and paedophiles are the most patient criminals in the whole world. They will work for 20 years to get into a position where they can abuse somebody. That's why, and I really don't want to offend anyone. I was raised Roman Catholic. That's why the Roman Catholic Church, loads of judges and all this. And people say, "Oh, that's class." It's not. It's true. I have met lots and lots of paedophiles. Some I knew they were paedophiles. Some I didn't. The ones that did know, back in the day, they would suffer the consequences of being found out amongst the prison population, and rightly so, because it made them feared going into prison for their offences. Now, they go to special prisons where they're all housed together. They don't have to fear reprisals, and the networks are set up. So if I go into prison for something unrelated to any sexual abuse around children and stuff, I will go to Brixton, which is a crap hole with tent and build, and I will get nothing. I will get the bare minimum. If if I go in and I've molested a child, I will go to a special prison and have all the privileges under the sun, and then be but it's not politically correct. It's like our prison system today. Our government does not report what goes on in our prisons because there'd be uproar. Our prisons are corrupt. The British prison system is turning out radicalised young men because society has wiped their hands of them. They put them in a human zoo, and then all of a sudden, someone says, "Come with us, play the cards, yeah." And so I had a choice in my day when I was doing Bird. It wasn't radicalised like it is today. If I was a young lad going into jail now, it'd be a lot harder to be able to do what I did. I through education and art saved me because it allowed me to be a bit of a loner, stay clear of most of the things. But I was, if ever there was a riot or something to go on against the authority, I was doing that. Yeah, and I paid the price for that.
You mentioned upgrading your technology and looking at even filmmaking. Eddie, if I were to have you back on the show in 5 years, what would I be talking to Ed Flanagan about?
My latest documentary or my latest film.
I love it. I love the confidence and I love the goal setting both.
Oh, I will do it. This is what I do now. It's about what keeps me sober, what keeps me sane is this. Conversations with people like yourself, friends like Gethin. I work with a guy called John Reed. His title is the Storyteller Fella. He's 73. Completely different life to me. He's straight. He's been a straight guy. He's a grandfather. He looks like a Hollywood grandfather. Voice like silk. Worked all his life. Never been in trouble. We're starting a company together. So John the Storyteller Fella and Ed the Head, the animator, we're starting up a CIC company so we can reach people like myself and other people within the community through my artwork, but with his connections, because he's got media connections and stuff like that. That's somebody saw potential in me. So that's what we need to do. We need to pay it on. I look for potential, not for perfection. Somebody saw potential in me and took time out, and that's my philosophy now. It's karma. If you do bad stuff's going to happen. If you live your life the right way, yeah.
Well, as noted, Eddie, I'm going to leave a link to your YouTube video in the show notes of this podcast, so folks can just go right there and
I'm hyper at the moment.
I'm sorry?
As well as my dyslexia, my brain is a million miles an hour. My daughter said to me, "You sure you're not OCD and stuff?" I've always been hyper, but it was always channeled into negativity, like addiction and stuff like that. So once I was free of the addiction, all that energy, all that process of feeding the addiction was no longer there and could be put to great use. It was like, someone took the shackles off. I'm truly blessed. I've got a second chance. Most people don't get it. Some people die in their addiction and they never get to say sorry or pay it back. I've got that chance. And losing my brother 2 weeks ago, things like that put life into perspective. I'm sober. I've got an amazing family. I've got a second chance at life with my family, people I love. And I just work collaborating with people with stuff I'm passionate about.
I can't thank you enough for being on the show. We're going to have you back because I'm going to want to get some updates on your amazing creative career. So thanks for being on the show, and we'll have you back.
I'll send you some links when we set up our company next year. I'll send you the link. Listen, bless you for your time, and thank you for reaching out. And to everyone over there, chin up, not out.
All right, Eddie, take care. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Big thanks again to Eddie Flanagan for sharing with us his journey into criminality as well as his journey out of criminality. Just goes to show once again that although we know a lot, we don't know it all. And the more we can learn from those with lived experiences, the more we are all going to benefit. Ed talked about how art was a part of his process and continues to be part of his process. To that end, if you want to check it out, and I encourage you to do so, check out his YouTube channel. It's entitled Ed the Head Flanagan, and Ed is spelled with two D's, E-D-D, Ed the Head Flanagan. I'll also leave a link in the show notes of this episode so you can leap to it directly from there. Go ahead and subscribe and keep up with all of Eddie's projects. Hey, back next week with a fresh episode. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, the Paragon Group, LLC.com, for training or presentations as to evidence-based practices and or implementation, or, of course, the topic of desistance from crime. If you have questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact the show via our email at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook page and our Instagram page at The Criminologist Podcast. New fun images are being added all the time to those feeds. You don't want to miss out. The Criminologist Media Group is also on Twitter at Crim Media Group, CRIM Media Group. Go ahead and give us a follow. You can also connect with me, Joseph Arvidsson, on LinkedIn and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Lastly, if you've not already done so, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this podcast. Merchandise is available. Reach out if you're interested. And if you believe in what we're doing on the show, if you're part of the movement, please spread the word. Tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us. Ask them to subscribe to the show. And of course, do so yourself if you have not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us.
He's got high hopes. He's got high hopes.
The Criminologist Podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, training opportunities, or to contact the host, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. Click on the Contact Us tab in the upper right-hand side of the page. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.
The thoughts, statements, and opinions of the host and cast members do not necessarily reflect the views of their employers and are those of the host and cast themselves. Any discussion regarding client statements, behaviors, actions, or crimes are purely fictional and are used only for the purposes of example. Any examples that could be deemed to be related to an actual individual or individuals are incidental.